morning, everyone. Welcome to NAB 2011 and welcome to the Autodesk booth. This is the presentation we like to call Flame Premium, Total Control and Finishing. So what do I mean by total control? Well, for Flame users, you get real-time color grading as part of your tool set in Flame Premium. And for colorists, it's all about having control over light in 3D space. And for smoke editors, in Flame Premium, you get all the creative tools in Flame you've always wanted, but with the timeline workflow you know and love. And we will also talk a little bit about relighting and the new relighting tools in Flame Premium. And for relighting, it's really all about the next generation tools for look development to have control over color, light, and volume in a 3D scene. To get started with the presentation, I'd like to show you a final from our customer Digital Pictures down under in Australia, and it's for Foster's Pure Blonde. And I'll play that back, and then we'll come back and I'll take you through the different examples that I want to show you in Flame Premium. We're going to look at grading, we're going to look at visual effects, and we're going to look also at the timeline workflow.
What's going on here? Come on, fella.
I'm sitting in a railway station, got a ticket for my destination.
Hello, Mr. Dove. Hi, Mr. Dove.
On a tour of one-night stands, my suitcase and guitar in hand. Every stop is neatly planned for a poet and a one-man band. Homeward bound, I wish I was homeward bound.
And the end is the beginning. So I think that's a fantastic spot, and thanks to the guys down at Digital Pictures in Australia for providing that material. What I'd like to do is start out using some of that material. We're going to bring that into the grading part of the application and start showing you some real-time color grading. So the benefit for those of you out there that are Flame users is that you have tools in the grading portion of Flame Premium that are specifically designed to work with just color correction. You can see the color coding in my shot bin. I've got red for a timeline proxy and green for my individual shots. And I'm just going to pull this 2K series of shots down into my storyboard area. And as soon as I do that, when I hit play, I'm now playing back in real time. I can bring up a thumbnail view of all the individual shots, and what's cool here is I can navigate this way through any part of the timeline. I can just click on any of these shots. I can scrub through that shot if I want to see that shot isolated from the timeline, and then I get an alternating checkerboard of the individual shots for the overall timeline here. So the navigation is something that I really like for this specific layout for color. So for example, I could start here on the first shot, and I can run all the way through the shots very quickly to see the guy that picks up the dove at the end. So that's a pretty cool layout. Now let's talk about the tools as far as color correction go. So again, the pipeline is input primaries, then 48 layers of secondary color correction, which we'll look at, and then also output primary. So we have basically a series, if you're a Flame user, of multiple color warpers, multiple color correctors, garbage masks, all that strung together, but again, with the ability to get real-time performance when I hit play. So as we're looping this back, you wouldn't typically color correct this way, but what I can do is show you the performance that as it's playing back, I can even grade. So let's go ahead and bump up the gain. We'll also put a little more saturation into this shot. Maybe we'll add some blue into the midtones. I won't go too crazy there. Let's go to the lows and put a little bit of cyan into that. And at any point I can show you, by bypassing back to the original, I can show you the grade that I'm applying. So you can see the before and after of what we're doing. If we go back to the master, maybe a little bit more gain will make that stand out a little bit more. Okay, so that's the primary level of color correction. The next thing we'll do is go to the first secondary, and I want to show you under the curves menu for saturation, you get a very familiar user interface that's very similar to what we have in our other products. So if I want to go in and add or enhance the blue like we see in the background in the bus or on the guy's jean jacket here, I can just pick up the curve for the blue and enhance that. So I'll bring it up so you'll see the bus goes by and it's a lot more blue in the background, or I can go the other way. I can just remove the blue. So we can isolate different types of color in our scene. So I'm going to go and put a little bit more blue in. We can also do the same thing for the reds, maybe bring a little bit more red into the stop sign or his skin tones. And that's one level of secondary color correction that we can be doing on this shot. But to take it a bit further, on the next selective, we'll activate that. You see I can also work with different shapes. So I can either hand draw shapes, I can create standard shapes, rectangles, lines, and circles, and things like that. And what we're effectively doing is saying, let's grade inside or outside of this shape. So I'll soften out the edges a little bit, maybe blur the edges a bit. And if we come back here now to my grading tools, I can start to enhance inside that area. So I could bring the gain up a little bit. Let's reset that. Or again, I can work outside of that. Let's bring the gamma down to create a vignette type effect. So what's great about having the possibility of working with the inside or outside of these shapes is that you effectively double up the number of secondaries that you have. So that's pretty good. We're looking good so far. And the nice thing we can also do with this is if we stop, we can go over to this section, which is our grade bin. And at any point in time, I can save any of these individual settings for a shot into the grade bin, either to show alternate versions of the same shot, or I could also copy and paste from the grade bin to other shots. So it's a way, if I reset that and then double click, I can just reapply that grading settings, those series of settings, to any of the shots in my timeline. Let's go back now to the third selective, and I want to show you another really cool thing that you can do. If I use a freehand shape, I can actually go on screen and just draw a shape. And once I've done that, we can take a look at the mat. But we're going to have an issue in terms of isolation on this scene because the guy's actually walking and the camera zooming in on the guy, and the shape, of course, is static. Well, we have really amazing tracking technology inside of Flame Premium. I think you're going to be impressed. All I have to do is hit, let's analyze that movement. We're using a planar tracker, and you can see it's automatically, if we look back at the mat and I start playing that again in real time, the software is automatically calculating the movement of the character, and it's rotating and scaling to lock on and let our mask always stay with him. So again, really, really impressive tracking technology. We'll see more of this throughout the demonstration. I can also go back and make adjustments now to the mask. We want to kind of spread that out a little bit. We can soften that out a bit. And now, I'll go back to playing in real time. We can start to draw your eye and give a little bit more focus to the character in the center of the screen. So the idea here is that not only do you get the real-time performance, but you get these very sort of familiar and very quick tools to isolate different parts of your image and, again, kind of paint that image and readjust and rebalance it. If you look at the beginning, this is where we started, and now this is where we've achieved our final look. Now, of course, we've only done that for one shot. The rest of the shots in this sequence need the same look. So again, I can go to the grade bin. I could reapply that initial look with our vignette to that one shot, but that's not very efficient. So we have some efficiency tools built in as well. So here's the whole series of shots that I want to apply that grade to. I can just pick up on the end of my pen the grade with those shots selected and just drag and drop those to the other shots with just one quick gestural movement. So you can see now all the other shots that I wanted to apply that grade to are going to have that same look. We can, of course, go back and make adjustments. Maybe we want to bring the gain down or a little less saturation on that shot. So we can go in and affect each of them individually, of course, but it's a great starting point for our overall grading. So far, we've only been looking at the beginning of the timeline. In the next sequence inside the apartment, there's more shots I can't see over here. So what I'm going to do is go into another view, which is like a storyboard layout view, and this is going to allow me to see every shot in my timeline. And what's great here is I can actually organize the shots into different orders based either on the playout order, as we see here, or maybe I actually want to put them in a different order temporarily. So in this sequence where we have the guy waking up and then he sees the birds ready to fly away and then he's all happy, these two shots were obviously shot at the same time from the same reel of film. So what we can do is go into our assembly tools and we can say, let's temporarily sort this timeline into a different order, into the order in which all of that film was actually recorded. And when I come back to my Q mode now, you can see that those shots, not only have they been brought to the beginning of my sequence, so these shots were obviously shot before the shots in the beginning of the scenes, but now we've got this guy side by side. And the benefit there is having that ability gives you the possibility of creating better continuity between those different shots. So let's talk about the indoor scene now. So what I'm going to do is go back here. Let's maybe bring the gain up a little bit, bring the saturation down slightly. We're just going to give a bit of an indoor grade to this, warm it up a little bit. Again, I can go in and use tools to select multiple shots in the timeline. That's an outdoor shot. So all the shots selected is that indoor apartment sequence. I can copy the grade over to all those different shots. And now you'll see the grade has been applied to everything indoors. But now I want to show it to my client. I want to say, let's look at that back in the original playout order, not in our temporary sort order. So I'm going to come back and say, now let's unsort that. Again, back in the queue mode, we see that everything's been put back in place. I can navigate down to the first shot in that sequence, and I can say, what's that going to look like? Well, here's that grade applied to all the shots in that sequence, and we can move on. So again, you get the idea of how efficient this process can be. Now, let's talk about some other tools. That's a good introduction to the software, but let's also talk about working within Flame Premium in our synchronized project. So I'm going to come back and clear out what we've done so far, and I'm going to go to a bookmark, and this bookmark is going to allow me to look into a library in the visual effects portion of the software. And here we see a record timeline. And I'm just going to drag and drop that timeline down into the storyboard area. So before we were looking at a basic one-layer timeline, but if we come here now, you'll see that we're working with actually a multi-layer timeline. And not only that, we've actually embedded mats inside of one of those shots. So this color coding of purple here is a common color coding throughout the software that allows me to say, okay, there's mats inside that shot. It's called a mat container. So we can actually access those mats rather than reproducing them here in this side of the application. I can just repurpose them and use them for grading. So that's pretty cool. Let's go back to our color correction. This is actually, now we're working with some logarithmic files. That's why they look washed out. These are the original film scans from this project that we're going to look at next, which is called Passat, and it comes to us from PSYOP in New York. And you can see that, again, it's a beauty shots of a car. I'm going to go back to the first scene and kind of repeat that message I was showing you earlier, which is the real-time performance and the ability to grade in real time. So we're going to go back now, and let's add a little bit of gain to this shot. Let's bring down the gamma. We'll bring down the lift and really kind of crunch up the black. So we want this to look a lot more contrasty. We want to give this a much more of a look. And we'll go to our midtones. We can add a little bit of blue in there, and we'll go to the shadow areas, and again, we'll put in some cyan. Now, what's cool about the ability to do this grading, obviously I've taken this into a much crunchier direction here, but what I can also do, even as I'm working this way, is another way to copy and paste would be, let's copy all of the grades from that shot to every other shot in the timeline. We'll clear that out now, and if we go back into our original playback, instead of looping, you can see it's that quick to actually just ripple down that grade to every shot in the timeline. So maybe it's not going to work for every shot. Maybe the densities will need to be adjusted, but you can see it's a great starting point to get our grading done, and that's really that message I want to get out to our Flame and Smoke users, is that this real-time grading capability allows you to get through things much, much quicker than having to do things, again, one shot at a time in our typical workflow in visual effects. So let's go now and take a look at some of the different options we have in terms of creating consistency between the shots. So this one I really like. This is the ability to say, let's have a comparison, side-by-side comparison view where I can load up different shots. So I could even take like the last shot in the timeline and maybe compare that to the second shot in the timeline. Again, we can do that even by looping the shots. So I could say, okay, what's that going to look like? Or how's that going to look side-by-side with that shot? We can take that a bit further by using a multi-view, and in this way we can actually tile out about 16 different images here. We've got the 16 view. You can use a 9-way or 6-way split to allow you to easily compare multiple shots in your timeline. And again, this is a great way to create consistency. You can actually group these shots together, and then you can go in and grade them together, or you can solo shots this way. So you can split shots. So there's a lot of great, again, tools for doing comparisons in the application. But let's get back now to the conversation around the container workflow. There's actually 2 shots that are going to be worked on in the next part of the process here, the next task when we go to visual effects, and that's going to be actually working with this shot, which was started initially in the visual effects portion of the software, and it has some mats that we're going to look at. And then there's this other visual effects shot that was done in Maya. So we're going to look at both of those shots now. So I've got this ball. It's been replaced. It's been generated in 3D. We've got some particles bouncing around inside of that. And what I want to do is go and get the mats associated with that rendered file. And what's great is I can actually, inside the grading part of the application, I can simply come in and containerize that particular clip and then step inside of it and add a couple of layers that are going to be used to put my mats inside of that container. So I can generate multiple layers inside any individual clip, and I can stack up multiple mats, unlimited number of mats, to then be able to utilize for grading. So here I've got my mats. I'm just browsing over the network. I'm going to go down and grab the mats for the ball that we just saw. I'm just going to drag the sphere mat down there. I'll drag the particle mat down there as well. And now when I go back to my timeline, I can just pick these up gesturally and just drag and drop and snap them into my container. We'll do the same thing for the particle layer as well. And now when I step out of the container and I go back into my secondaries, if I activate the secondary, we'll look at the mat. You can see I get a pop-up now that's going to allow me to load up the mats directly from somewhere else in the facility. So why remake shapes, especially complex shapes? So we're going to go in and look at the one for the particles. I don't want to draw a mask for each and every one of these particles. I know someone's generated that mat somewhere else. Let me go grab it and reutilize it here inside of the grading portion. So if we come back, what can we do now? Let's go to the end of that shot. We'll go back to our grading tools. I can, of course, start to grade, as I was showing you before, either inside or outside of that shape. So maybe we want to bump up just the gamma on the outside of that shape and maybe add a little bit of color into it. And you can see, again, that's a part of our efficiency story, is the ability to do that. Now, for the other mat, for the particles here, I want to add a little bit of an effect. So there's effects palette here. I could add things like glows. So if I add a glow, you can see the parameters here. If we go back to my grade bin, I had one that I had created a little bit earlier where I've just used the glow plugin to glow those particles. And again, if I want to, I can play that back in real time. I can show you the before and the after of that. So again, there's a lot of really control. This is what we mean by total control. Control over the image and the ability to repurpose different parts of the pipeline and reutilize mats in this part for grading. So back to our timeline, there was also the shot that I mentioned earlier, this shot, which was actually generated inside of the visual effects side. So what I'm going to do is step inside of that area and show you that the mats associated with that are actually kind of a different style of mat, something we like to refer to as disco mats, because they have multiple mats combined into the multiple channels of this image. So into the RGB channels, we've now loaded up multiple mats. So we effectively have 3 mats for each of these layers. So we have 6 mats at our disposal. And if I come back and we work similarly then as we did before, we come into our secondaries and I say, let's look at the first mat. There's the car mat, right? But there's also other mats that came across. We have the shadow mat, so 3 mats within that one mat with our disco mat. We'll use the car mat, and we're also going to enable this one is going to be for the background. So we've got our background. Now, the only issue that comes up is if we try to use these mats together, they're actually going to have an intersection here in the center. So what we can also do, once we load up our mats, is we can combine them in different ways. So we can multiply them together, subtract one mat from the other. In fact, if I invert that, now you'll see that we're only going to be affecting the background, but we're subtracting the mat of the car from that. So that makes it much, much easier, of course, to control where you're applying your grades. So if we come here now, I can go to work on the inside of the car. We can brighten that up and make grading adjustments there. Or of course, now that we've subtracted the mat of the car, we can come in and we can bump up the background without spilling over into the car's mat. So again, I hope you see that this is all part of our total control story inside of Flame Premium. What we're going to do now is we're going to relaunch back into the visual effects side, and we're going to look at some visual effects inside of Flame Premium. But before I do that, we've seen some of this footage. I'd like to play you down the final of that. This is a commercial, again, that was done at PSYOP in New York for Passat.
We had the idea of the world's most efficient engines. The idea of headlights more intelligent than ever. And the idea of assistance systems that are the most innovative yet. Well, then we had 1 or 2 additional ideas. Speaking of ideas, automatic distance control. The new Passat.
Volkswagen, das Auto.
So that's a beautiful commercial, and I wanted to mention that the 3D elements that you saw, those balls coming down, those were done in Autodesk Softimage, one of our other products in our family of products here. So some beautiful work done at SIOP. So what we're looking at now is the desktop environment of Flame Premium. So this is sort of a standard layout for Flame users. And what we're going to do is talk about how those rendered elements work between the different parts of the application. So if we go into this library that I set up called From Grading, here we see the original timeline that I sent to grading. And if I go in and look inside this library, this is where we've deposited the renders from grading. So you can see now we've got the grading decisions that we made in the other side of the application. So I can pull these up, I can play them back, I can look at them. Here, of course, I can play this back in real time. But what I want to also show you is that not only the individual shots come rendered back from grading, we also get our mats back, and we also get this shot, which is actually the entire timeline, the entire graded timeline now that's returned from one part of the application to the other. So it's a bidirectional passing of this multi-layer timeline with mat containers. And you can see that what we've got now is everything coming back to our visual effects side. So everything's preserved is the message here. So now we can pick this up and we can start to work on all of our visual effects. Now maybe that's the process. Maybe you've done your grading and then you're going to come to visual effects and you're going to do some additional things, some titles, maybe some effects on top. But of course we know that no job is really ever a linear process. There's never any job that goes smoothly without a revision, and then you have to step back to something, an earlier version or something like that. So we thought it would be important to discuss what do you do when your timelines sort of become out of sync. So we're going to go back into the procedural compositing area within Flame Premium known as Batch, and this is where all of our visual effects are generated. And I'm just going to take the original timeline now, and I'm going to go down to the last shot and take you through how we can sync up shots that become sort of out of sync with the grading and the visual effects and the editorial decisions that can be made. So what I'm going to do is select the last shot in the timeline. I'm going to enter what's called a batch effect. And inside our batch effects, we're able to nest all of these different compositing decisions into just one, what appears to be one shot in the timeline. So underneath that shot is an entire batch tree that can be created. And what we've got for this shot is, and it's pretty simple, we're just going to have one layer over a background. We got a big cyc, it's like an 8K plate in the background there. And we want to cut this car out and remove it from this layer and then have it sort of flying into our cyclorama in the background. And to do that, I want to show you a very cool capability inside of Action. This is the 3D compositing workspace inside of Flame Premium. And what I want to do is introduce you to this concept of the garbage mask. So typically garbage masks are applied on a layer basis. You'd go into the keyer, you would make your shape, you'd come back out. But what's really neat about this way of working with garbage masks is that these garbage masks are actually working in the 3D space itself. So what's cool is I can use all the same sort of standard conventions that we're used to with garbage masks. You can see I can create linear points, Bezier handle points, and I'm just going to outline the car, and we're going to cut that out and place it on this shot. So maybe bring that wheel down and move that over a little bit. Okay, so there's my rough shape for that garbage mask. And if we look through the working camera now, we'll zoom up, orbit around, you can see that I'm really just using that garbage mask because it's linked to that image. It's locked onto just that image, and it's allowing me to see through that image to the background, which is temporarily turned off. So that's pretty cool. So we've got this way of kind of linking garbage masks to individual layers or 3D objects inside the 3D compositing workspace of Action. The other problem that I have, though, is that this car is moving. We saw it's a moving shot. So what I'm going to do is go down to the garbage mask itself, and I'm going to say to the software, let's follow that shape using that same tracking technology we saw in grading. So again, because we have this synchronized environment, I'm able to really use tools from different parts of the application for different tasks. So before we saw that to create a shape to follow the guy so we could grade inside of it. Now we're doing the opposite of that. In a way, we're actually going to do something where we literally cut the car out using this shape. We can shape track forward or backward. It's an automatic process. It's able to do planar tracking. It's locking onto points within that scene. It's quickly doing that for me, and it's going to give me back a result that gets me a really good starting point for cutting out that car, right? It's kind of automatically done that for me. Now, if I have any issues with this mask, there's of course adjustments that can be made. We can go in, we can scale, rotate, we can translate these points around, so I can maybe scale it down. It got a little bit too big on the last frame, so we could do something like that. And again, that's working pretty well, so you get the idea. If we go back to our result, of course we want to invert that result. We really just want to cut out the car. And we can also assign these masks to different layers. So now I can say be selective, like you would do with a lighting tool. Be selective to just that layer. And now if we go back to our working camera, you can see that we've cut the car out and he's separated from the background. All right, so that's pretty cool, but we're not done. Remember, the problem was, get my result again. There we go, let's load that up. The problem was that we're working with the ungraded material, right? We know that those grades that I created earlier have been rendered back to this library, so there's an updated version, if you will, with a graded car. So what I need to do is I need to sync those elements back up. And you can see all the shots in my timeline right now, they're all ungraded. In fact, this containerized clip, I'm going to uncontainerize it to show you that there's my container up here. I'm just going to bring that back up. So we need to actually sync up multiple shots in my timeline to the graded material. Well, it's really easy to do in Flame Premium. I'll do what's called a revision. I'm just going to rename this timeline now revised. We'll go to the From Grading library and send that entire timeline in there. And now when I step back into the library, there's my graded material, and here's my newly updated visual effects timeline with the ungraded material. So it's as simple as coming in here and saying, let's unlink all of the ungraded material. We'll go and say, let's relink from the entire library, because there's some shots that never even went to grading. These were only some elements that were residing in the visual effects portion of the software. And now I'm going to say, let's relink based on clip name, time code, tape name, every one of those visual effects changes to the graded material. And when we load that back into batch, it takes a second to kind of update. When we go back down to the end, you can see that now we've got our graded car replaced into our timeline. So you can see the power of being able to work with these different tasks, get these different things done, and then work around this unified mechanism, which is our multi-layer timeline with matte containers. And if we step back inside of that shot, you can see there is our mask that we generated live in front of you. So again, a very, very powerful workflow. Let's go into the shot that we sent over to grading before, where we had the disco mats. So you guys remember the disco mats? This is how they were generated before. This is the original setup that I used to render out the result that was then in that container that we grabbed the mats out of.